So in my work, I come across many intercompany agreements entered between different legal entities within the same multinational group. Some common observations I've had. They generally prepare as an afterthought when the requirement arises either for statutory audit closure or to meet the demand of the tax officer. They're drafted or prepared to meet the bare minimum need or just enough to meet the current requirements. They're sometimes disconnected from what is happening on the ground. I'm not talking about any intentional and deliberate disconnect, and that is not even going to be the scope of my discussion today, but I'm referring to the disconnect that may sometimes arise simply due to the fact that the agreement may be finalized based on standardized templates to meet the audit and tax requirement without fully aligning with the business or the on-the-ground realities. So such agreements do not stand the test of time and are prone to frequent amendments and changes. This may not be a good governance practice and will not gain the trust of the tax officer and the regulators should any dispute arise in future that stems from the understanding captured in the agreement. I will share 10 basic checkpoints you should consider before finalizing any agreement. Hi everyone, welcome to Tax Vichara, a platform created with a mission to simplify and share practical knowledge and experience on tax. If you are new here and interested in our content, please consider subscribing to the channel. My name is Vaishaka and I'm a practicing CA in the field of direct tax. Before I go ahead and talk about the 10 checkpoints, I just want to say a few things. This video is to help you document the actual conduct of parties that would help evidence the actual behavior. It is not to provide tips and tricks to document something that does not align with what is happening on the ground. The agreement would be of best quality when it factors and takes into consideration the past, current requirement as well as the future requirements. This will be the theme with which I will take you through the 10 checkpoints. These points are compiled based on understanding of the TP principle, nature of questions raised in assessment proceedings, facts which I felt would have supported our case better while preparing for appellate proceedings, observation in certain judicial decisions, and some good hygiene factors. This video is made in 2 parts. This is part 1 and I will give you 5 checkpoints in today's video. Do come back to watch part 2 which will contain the balance 5 points. With this background, let's get started. Firstly, ensure there is an agreement that covers all intercompany transactions in your group. Better to have an agreement or even a simple memorandum of understanding for all the transaction, even if it is small, one-off and non-recurring. I have seen cases where a taxpayer has struggled to demonstrate and evidence the actual receipt of services when it was questioned, only worsened by the fact that there was no underlying agreement in the first place. This is as important as the rest of the agreement, as it gives the first impression and communicates the intent of the parties. Use of generic titles like agreement for services, intercompany agreement, etc. can be avoided. So use specific titles that gives a broad indication of what can be expected in the agreement. Example, intercompany agreement for provision of IT support services, or license agreement for use and exploitation of manufacturing know-how of X product in the North American territory. More importantly, the title should not contradict with the essence of the agreement. For example, I have seen an international secondment agreement having the title of Intercompany Services Agreement. You can imagine the consequences it could have. This is to basically understand the difference between the date of the agreement versus the effective date of the agreement. The date of the agreement is date when the parties sign the agreement, whereas the effective date indicates the date from when the terms and conditions contained in the agreement is operational and hence needs to be given a thought. Here, we need to think of the past and the current requirement. Where it is a new transaction or perhaps a continuing transaction but with modified terms and conditions, the effective date shall be from when the new transaction started or from the date when the change terms is effective. I always get asked whether the agreement should be backdated. The effective date can be prior to the date of signing the agreement. It basically means the parties have now reduced to writing as on the signing date of their understanding which existed from the effective date. Therefore, not having an explicit clarification on this would result in ambiguities. Now, it could also be a case where it relates to a continuing transaction but an agreement did not exist in the past. In such cases, I would recommend making it effective from the first day of the relevant financial year in which the agreement is signed. There may be some practical issues in making the agreement effective prior to the ongoing financial year. The past period can, however, be covered by a separate agreement. If you do so, you may include a clause that mentions that the current agreement supersedes all other prior agreements and understanding. We need to understand that this is not a legal contract in the truest sense. Since the agreement is between group entities, the parties are not going to take each other to the court or an arbitrator for any kind of a settlement or a dispute resolution. Unlike in a commercial contract where the intention is to capture the understanding between parties for their own benefit, in a related party contract, the agreement is put in place to prove the intent and understanding to external parties such as bankers, auditors, tax officers, etc. So use simple language. It's not necessary to use complex legal construct and language. Every terms and conditions in an agreement could potentially have an impact from a tax and a transfer pricing standpoint. So the write-up should be watertight. Let's say you want to draft an agreement for providing technology services. It is important to capture the scope very tightly such that one can make out the broad category to which it falls. As you're aware, the expectation of markup could be different for software research and development versus software maintenance and support versus the routine IT-enabled services. The scope captured in the agreement should clearly put down the nature and where there are different categories. Identify and capture those specifically so that you are able to ring fence and contain the consequence of or consequent implication to a specific bucket. Another example would be that of geography of operation. The royalty rate of exploitation of a particular know-how in the North America may be different from having or giving a worldwide rights. Likewise, whether or not there is a sub-licensing rights has an impact on the overall royalty rate. Accordingly, it is important to clearly and specifically draw out the scope. That's it for today, guys. The balance 5 points shall be shared in the part 2 of this video. Please do come back to watch us. Hope you found it useful. Please do share your feedback in the comment section below. Subscribe to our channel if you want to be notified about the future videos. Also, do follow our page on LinkedIn where I post regular updates that you may find useful. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.